Thank you very much for tuning into our two-part interview with the real truther. Now, just so you know that part 2 is going to be dropping in just a couple of days, so hold on to your socks for that. Today's introduction is going to be very short, purely for the fact that I had to get a whole bunch of vaccinations for business travel, and I'm not feeling so fresh. That's an absolute lie. I feel amazing and better protected than ever. The real truther is a person who spends an absolutely inordinate amount of time online debunking anti-vaccination myths. Him, along with a whole bunch of very heroic people, and, you know, you got to commend them for that. Shout out to you guys. We know who you are. They spend a lot of time debunking misinformation around anti-vaccination myths, misinformation, disinformation, outright lies, fraud, whatever it is. So this is an introduction to that world. It's an insight into that world. And the reason why it's coming in 2 parts is quite simply because the depth and breadth and the whole swaths of information simply wouldn't fit into one episode. So we actually went into a second hour of an episode. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm going to invite him back in for a third episode where maybe we can have a little bit more time to go more into depth into some of the things that were mentioned. So if you don't know what an anti-vaxxer is or what their social media online presence is and what damage that they've done, you're definitely going to learn something here. If you know what an anti-vaxxer is, then I have a feeling you're still going to walk away with a lot of information because you mightn't have been able to see behind the curtain of some of these charlatans, frauds, idiots, victims, or unknowing people. You know, like you can't toss them all in one bucket. And yeah, it's a very interesting and very eye-opening conversation. So I definitely think you're going to walk away with this. And if you are an anti-vaxxer, maybe you might learn something too. Sorry, this is not a 3-hour YouTube video and not in your preferred format, but who knows? Maybe this might be worthwhile. So guys, definitely check in and enjoy.
This is Random Urban Memories, brought to you by the Rum Boys. You've seen, heard, or felt it on the streets. Well, we're here to talk about it.
In 3, 2, 1...
And here we are, everybody, with the one and only, introduce yourself.
Hello, I am known as The Real Truther online, on Twitter, Facebook, and thanks for having me. This is actually my first podcast, so looking forward to having some fun while we debunk some anti-vax tropes.
That sounds like absolute fun, and thank you very much for giving us the time. So let's get into it, shall we? So
sure.
You are you real or are you a bot? That's one thing I see thrown against you.
Yeah, that's a good question, and my wife does ask me that occasionally. But I believe I'm real, even though there are times where I am accused of being a bot. There are times where I'm accused of being a shill, paid by pharma, of course, as most science advocates are online. But I'm neither of those things, no relationship to pharma, and I have my own small business unrelated to science or vaccines. I am married to a doctor, but she also is not a big fan of pharma. They've actually banned pharma from their hospital. And no, I am a real person, to answer your question.
Oh, excellent. And you mentioned something there, a shill. So what we're talking about is that you spend an ungodly amount of time actually chasing down misinformation, disinformation, and outright lies. And the way you do, excuse some background noise there. But the way you do that is by simply debunking and by actually adding if somebody says something in particular, you put the truth down. You lay it down and go, no, here's a real link. Read it. This is why you're not right. That, of course, turns into you being somehow paid by pharma to propagate information and disseminate information about pharma for pharma. Is that an accurate representation of an online show?
It is. And it's also one of the most boring and tired cliche accusations that you can give. It usually comes when someone is desperate or cannot respond, and that's sort of where they'll go to. And when you actually think about it mathematically, technically, logistically, for pharma to actually pay people to go online and go into some individual threads where there's like 20 people talking about vaccines and how that's going to actually improve their sales worldwide, where vaccines are about 1 to 3% of their global sales, yeah, they're still making a lot of money off vaccines. Nobody denies that, but they also pay millions of dollars to develop and test vaccines. But having said that, yeah, why would pharma do that? It makes literally no sense. And, 95% plus of America vaccinates their children. Are they really trying so hard to get like an extra 0.5% to vaccinate by paying people online? None of it actually makes sense when you think about it, but that's what we deal with anti-vaxxers.
That pretty much sums up the issue, though, doesn't it? Like, it's just simply accusations thrown around, a lot of pretty much always baseless, and then in the end you're sitting there going, okay, what does that even mean, And I tell you one thing, though, if we were pharma shills, because I've been called a pharma shill, even though I don't particularly spend much time debunking issues. Every time I see a thread or I see daftness, I'll jump in because it's quite simply entertaining to see the limit of their knowledge or the limit of how little they're willing to actually read something or test something, and then to be called a pharma shill. And I'm sitting here in rented accommodation in Ireland. You know what I mean? Like, I should be in Barbados somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
I should be.
That sounds nice.
I should be sinking my shillbux into casinos and whatnot. That's what I should be doing. So let's get back down to basics and the origins kind of thing. So we had it's kind of a long time coming that we actually do have this conversation. We've been on and off on Twitter and chatting in between, and we had a couple of Skype calls just to get to know each other. And you had said that you actually started not debunking anti-vaxxers as such. How did you start? And how did your role in this become clear?
Cool. Yeah, definitely good question. So yeah, I started out as someone who was kind of dealing with conspiracy theorists online, mainly Holocaust deniers, 9/11 conspiracy theorists, Sandy Hook deniers, people who, believe in debunked conspiracy theories, but specifically Holocaust, Sandy Hook, two of the ones I consider the most hateful and vile people probably on earth. And these are people that really do it for a singular reason, especially with Holocaust denial. It's hatred, it's anti-Semitism. And I came from a background where I learned a lot about the Holocaust. It was very important to me. Mm-hmm. When I was younger, I went to Poland and spent a lot of time at all the different camps there in Birkenau, Auschwitz, stood inside the gas chambers, saw the gas stains on the ceiling and the scratch marks from people who have been executed there. There were people in my group that literally were collapsing and just in tears, couldn't even go near the gas chambers. They had relatives that were lost. And then I went to Israel and went to the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum there. I've been to the museum many times in Washington, D.C. And then to come back online and see people trying to deny that, it made me sick to my stomach. And I felt like I had to sort of do something, not necessarily to debate them, because debating Holocaust deniers is futile, and really it's pointless. It legitimizes them.
I was just going to say debate. Yeah, debate assumes that there's a standpoint on the other side.
Exactly, and we'll get to that with anti-vaxxers, but specifically with Holocaust deniers, they don't really have there's no inherent danger right now for them, which is why you might want to debate vaccine people online more than Holocaust deniers. But yeah, it legitimizes their position. It creates their side as a side, and it gives them an outlet to speak their lies. So it wasn't about debating them. It was more about exposing them. Same thing with Sandy Hook deniers. I'm actually from Connecticut, and I still remember the day that happened. And it's such a tragedy. And then for people to terrorize the parents of children who were brutally murdered, it takes a special kind of sick monster to do that. And sadly, there's just so many people who are like in the middle of the country or anywhere, or anywhere in the country outside of Connecticut, who just have no idea and just sit in their basement and believe these things. And so again, exposing those people. And so doing all that, combination with marrying a doctor, who I then started to see all this bullying and harassment against doctors online and lies about them, it led me naturally to the world of vaccine deniers, anti-vaxxers, as we call them and as they are. And there is a natural overflow, as well, as I could talk about the different types of anti-vaxxers, between those conspiracy theorists, those Holocaust deniers and Sandy Hook deniers, and anti-vaxxers. Like I always say, not every anti-vaxxer is a Holocaust denier, but pretty much every Holocaust denier also is an anti-vaxxer. And there's a reasoning behind that. There's a psychology behind that.
There seems to be common threads, isn't it, there between certain groups of conspiracy theories, isn't it? Like it's really the same way that such an unbelievably large proportion of flat earthers are super religious or bizarrely religious. Like they have their own take on it. It's really odd, but yeah, there's a commonality across them. And do you mind breaking down some of these? Who and what is an anti-vaxxer that we call an anti-vaxxer now? Yeah,
so it's funny. So obviously, anti-vaxxer means you're against vaccines. And there's actually James Lyons Wheeler, who is one of the anti-vax advocates who profits off doing so and is pretty much always asking for money for some kind of scheme he's working on. He says that he actually believes in the theory of vaccines, but doesn't believe in the current vaccines we have, or something to that effect. I'm probably misquoting him, but which is kind of like saying, I believe in the theory of races. I just don't like the ones that are not white. Yeah. If you're against the current vaccines, then you're anti-vaccine, because I always like when someone says, well, that's a slur calling me an anti-vaxxer. And I said, okay, my response will always be, okay, well, can you list the vaccines that you endorse and advocate for? And of course, you'll never get a response because they don't have any, because they're anti-vaccine. That's what an anti-vaxxer is. In general, an anti-vaxxer is someone who's going to exaggerate the risks of vaccines, because obviously there are risks, as with anything, and we can get into that, and then lessen the benefits, and doing that for an agenda. And if you do that, then you're anti-vaccine. And I do have sort of a list I've come up with of the 3 and now 4 different groupings of people who are anti-vaccine. And in my years doing this, I've really never met anyone that falls outside these groups. And there's, of course, people that will deny that they're in one of these groups, but generally they are if you really look into it. And I'm not saying there's not going to be an outlier or an exception, but these are the 4 major groups of anti-vaxxers, and I'll go over them right now. So the first one is the one we just talked about, the conspiracy loons. And those are like the people that are really anti-government, anti-Semitic. They believe in the NWO, which is the New World Order controlling things, and they believe in 9/11. Conspiracy theories, Sandy Hook, Holocaust, even flat Earth,
Illuminati, and so on, exactly. So forth, Rothschilds and all that.
Any mass shooting is a false flag. They had come up with insane theories about everything, and basically they don't trust the government for anything. And so because the government endorses vaccines, obviously they can't trust that vaccines are safe and effective. And they believe all kinds of crazy theories, like vaccines are meant to depopulate the Earth, which goes against how the population has increased since vaccines were introduced.
Worst scheme ever.
Exactly. And also how, we are now living longer. And we can get into their lies about how we're the unhealthiest generation ever right now, which is insane. I always ask people, well, what century would you prefer my kids live in that would be healthier, that where they'd live longer? How many people are dying of AIDS now compared to the 80s? How many cancer deaths are down? Infant mortality rates are down. Everything is down as we had to make more vaccines. SID rates, which is another common trope we can get into, down 29% in the last decade. They're at the lowest of all time. They've gone down as we add more vaccines. There's even a study that shows that vaccines can reduce SIDS, yet they say that SIDS are created by vaccines. They call it VIDS, vaccine-induced. Yeah, and that's one of the most horrifying and evil things that you can do online, is to exploit a dead child for your own agenda. We can get into that. But anyway, getting on a rant here, but getting back to that. So number one is the conspiracy people, and those are people you're generally not going to change their minds. Actually, you're not going to change your minds of any of these type of people generally, but these people are just far gone. But they're also, I don't want to say they're harmless, but they're not someone I really spend a lot of time with. I might, use them for entertainment, but they're not, you're not going to have a serious conversation with someone who believes that Sandy Hook was faked and the earth is flat. So we can just leave those people alone for now. And then number 2, and these are the people this is what makes it very hard online when you're trying to discuss this and use facts and use evidence-based science. These are vulnerable parents who have been exploited because of their children. And we'll talk about who they're exploited by. But these are people that have children with serious and challenging conditions, including autism, and like autism, that it can be challenging, obviously, but also other neurological disorders, all kinds of other issues. And they're not actually caused by vaccines, but they believe they are. So they're not lying that their children have these conditions, have these issues. And they're not lying at all because they actually believe what they believe. I think most parents online actually believe when they say they have a hashtag believe mothers, like we should believe them and I actually believe that they believe. But the problem is the science, the facts show that the condition their child has is not caused by a vaccine. So they can believe it, but it goes against science. So this is a large group of people online, and the so-called, warrior moms who have children with these challenging conditions believe that they're caused by vaccines, and then will, join this movement, join this anti-science, anti-vax movement. That's number two. And those I consider basically they're victims, because they're victimized by the people we're going to talk about next, and the people I most seek to expose. People attack me online. They're like, how do you attack a mother of a vaccine-injured child? Well, then I say, well, can you show me where I did that? Can you show me where I bullied and harassed a mother? Absolutely not. I'm completely against that. I don't think anyone should necessarily do that. That's not right. That's not how we improve science and how spreading the word about real science. When people say, why are you attacking all these mothers? And I say, well, take a look at all my videos that I've done. And I've done a lot of videos. Show me which one is a mother or even father that has a vaccinated child. They're actually all in group number 3, which we'll get into right now. So number 3 are the charlatans who exploit those vulnerable parents for profit and or fame. It's not always for profit, generally is. It's also for fame and for agendas and for having a God complex, which some of them do. Or some people are just in too deep. Their entire career, they spent 10 years, 20 years going against vaccines. They can't just all of a sudden say they were wrong. That's just who they are now. But these people, they're the ones that that I seek to expose the most, the ones that anger me the most, because they prey on very vulnerable parents. When you have a child with a very challenging neurological issue or other condition, and let's say it happened at some point after a vaccine, and even though it's not caused by a vaccine, you have someone telling you it was the vaccine, or even worse, as we discussed, a child who dies of SIDS, and you prey on those parents. That is evil. That is wrong.
Truly.
And that's, and that is what I seek to expose. And these, these profiteers, these snake oil salesmen, these grifters have been multiplying as the internet and social media and websites have grown, and have now turned this entire scam into a industry. And I call it the anti-vax industry, because if you go online and all these websites, I always ask people when they say, well, there's no money to be made in being anti-vax. I'm like, well, tell me a notable website that shares anti-vax misinformation that isn't profiting. Natural News, Mercola, Green Med Info, Sherry Tenpenny, Paul Thomas, Larry Cook. When we'll get into Del Bigtree and Wakefield and David Wolf, all these people are making a lot of money. There's no notable anti-vax website not profiting in some way, no notable leader not profiting in some way. So it's become this entire industry, and it's all sort of mixed in with the alternative, quote unquote, medicine and natural wellness, quote unquote, industry. The global wellness industry has exploded now. It's worth 3 times global pharma. So these people will fearmonger, and then we get into the anti-vax chiropractors, the anti-vax doctors. They'll naturopaths, homeopaths. They'll fearmonger about vaccines, but then they'll sell you their supplements. And Tony Bark is one who has an entire website selling supplements, but online she'll fearmonger about vaccines. But then she'll also sell herself as an expert, quote unquote, witness in criminal trials, making $11,000 for a 3-day trial, which we discovered. Things like that, and there's just a lot of money to be made now. And people look at certain doctors that are anti-vax, and you wonder if they make more money not actually practicing medicine, because, like Dr. Paul Thomas, I imagine he makes more money selling his books and doing his talks and all his other stuff. That's a notable anti-vaxxer from up north here in the United States. So those are the people. That's number 3. And then finally, this is sort of a newer one that I added in, but it's people that are anti-vaccine for religious or political reasons, sort of like religious zealots, political zealots. But at the same time, while there probably are some that are that way, libertarians maybe, who are, for the health freedom, quote unquote, which is a sort of made up term used to sell anti-vax propaganda. These people, a lot of times real anti-vaxxers who don't really have the religious or political beliefs that make them anti-vax, because there really are none. There's no major religion that doesn't endorse vaccination. They use that as a way to sell their lies to politicians who may be, vulnerable to this, like, libertarian politicians or Republican politicians lately. It seems like those are the ones they're going after to try to sell this health freedom, which is, again, sort of a made up term to try to legitimize what they're doing. What they're really trying to do is, it's not freedom for anyone. It's just their ability to make their own choices and do their own experiments on their child and see if their child will be more healthy when science has proven otherwise. So those are the four that I've seen the most. And it's hard to find someone that's not in one of those four categories.
I think that actually sums up the categories pretty well, and that includes all the types of people that I've seen online and interacted with online. I think that falls pretty well into those margins. So I think you got that pretty much right.
And for people who call anti-vax a slur, first of all, I'll say to them, okay, so if it's a slur, that's a negative word, which means you believe being against vaccines is negative, which in turn I agree with. It is. Why wouldn't you want to embrace what you are? There are some that do embrace it, but most try to create other names like non-vaxxer or ex-vaxxer, names that are never going to catch on. A lot of people don't even know what anti-vaxxers are, let alone ex or non-vaxxers. And, if you're against the death penalty, for example, you're anti-death penalty. It's not a slur to describe your stance. And so if you believe it's a slur, then you believe there's something negative about being against vaccines. And like I said, I would agree with you there.
No, it's incredible, and that's one of the things, more so on Facebook, weirdly enough. But you'd get some people that when you turn around saying, "Okay, stop spreading your anti-vax lies," they're like, "How can I be anti-vax? I was vaccinated. I just don't want my kids to have it." You're kind of like, "What? That doesn't make sense at all. Like the logic and the semantics of it doesn't make sense at all." You know what I mean?
Yes, not a lot makes sense. And when you actually think about the things they're saying, they have their talking points. They have their propaganda lines. They have their bumper sticker slogans, the parroted lines that they copy from the websites and from the YouTube videos. But when you actually start to think about it, when you actually start to examine each one of the things they say, there's some truth into a lot of what they say. That's why we call it misinformation. Not everything they say is an outright lie. If they say vaccines are not 100% safe, I say I agree with you. But then I say nothing's 100% safe, right? This phone that I'm talking on right now could kill me right now. Last year, someone died from a whipped cream can. Seriously. And it happened. So anything can kill you, and especially any medical intervention or drug. Now, what you have to look at is, what are the benefits versus the risks? It's, going back to like something like a seatbelt argument, which they hate,
Oh, they hate it so much.
They hate it so much because it's so right. And when you think of, and they'll say, well, you don't inject seatbelts, which is a ridiculous argument, because if you think of it this way, seatbelts do kill and injure and harm. No question. There's actually a website that is actually against seatbelts that I found, and it lists, and I have this link and I use it. Yeah, it's not a big movement, because there's not a lot of money to be made in it, which is why the anti-vaccine movement, I believe, has grown. But there's a small group of people who say that seatbelts should not be regulated by law, be required by law. And so this website lists all the deaths, all the injuries from people stuck in seatbelts, couldn't get out, died in fires, explosions, etc., or got harmed by them. And there are more people who died and got harmed from seatbelts, most likely in 1 year, than will ever get die or get harmed from vaccines. There's no question more people are harmed from seatbelts. And seatbelts are required by law, unlike vaccines. And seatbelts don't protect other people. You wear a seatbelt, you're not going to protect an entire school or other people in your family or other people in a park that you go to, unlike vaccines, which do. So vaccines protect more people. Yeah. They're not required by law, and they harm and injure less and have more benefit, and have just many or more benefits. So it is a good comparison to make about a product that is not 100% safe. But here's the thing: when they say vaccinating is not 100% true, the choice of vaccinating is not 100%, but the choice of not vaccinating, choosing to not vaccinate, is also not without risk. Definitely not 100%. And science has shown that when you do that, you're actually choosing more risk for your child. And when you compare the risks of the diseases, the harms, the injury, the death rates from the diseases, and we can do that to the vaccines, it's no contest. The vaccines have lower risk, hands down. And that's why we vaccinate. If there was something that was 100% that could stop all those diseases and no one would ever have any side effects or reactions to, obviously we would choose that. But nothing like that exists, and I doubt nothing will ever be 100% safe.
That's the thing, though. But see, I think the anti-vaxxers, because they have such a relatively low understanding of science, or even how some statistics work or whatever, they just see the risk part of it. But if you read the insert of something like a paracetamol or aspirin or something like that, like the possibility of something could happen is extraordinarily low, but it has to be listed. But if you if you didn't know what the name of the drug was, it's quite scary what can happen, you know, increased heart valves or, you know, heart attack, stroke, that kind of thing, you know, but in extraordinarily low instances, but it has to be listed. But it could be anything, you know, but they tend to ignore that. And like you said, the risk versus reward factor is the incidence of a genuine vaccine injury. And I mean a genuine one, not what they list in the VIRS, and we'll get into that as well. But all these other things, like, for example, a sore arm, you know, that's normal with a vaccination. That's normal when you you have a sore mouth when they do a deep clean on your teeth. That's kind of a medical intervention as well. So this is, I think, largely the issue. They don't understand what it actually is, because a genuine vaccine injury, which can happen, but only 1 in a million, it's very unfortunate. But it's so incredibly rare that something bad should happen. It's the same as somebody who takes an aspirin and it's a blood thinning agent and definitely shouldn't have taken it, but might end up, dying of something underlying that was triggered by it, for example. But extraordinarily rare.
Exactly. Yeah, and we have data for that, and that's
absolutely, because it's all recorded and it's all used to improve medication.
Right, but. Yeah, but it's data they deny, of course. But here's the thing. They do a lot of denying. But yeah, so they bring up, and we can talk about it later. I was going to talk about, the vaccine court and how you get compensated for actual real vaccine injuries. And, that's why we have the data from that. And from like a 10-year period, 2006 to 2016, there were over 3.1 billion doses of vaccines given. And 3,737 vaccine reactions were compensated, which, if you do the math, it means for every 1 million doses of vaccines that were distributed, one individual was compensated, which is a pretty incredible safety record when you consider that 1 in 700,000 is your chances of getting hit by lightning this year. Okay. It's actually, and that shows the safety. So I get anti-vaxxers all the time saying, well, we have a vaccine injury court that's paid out $4 billion. And I say, wow, that's a big, scary number. So is that in 1 year? Oh, no, that's in 30 years. Okay. So there's that for 10 vaccines? No, that's for, billions of vaccines given out. And how many were compensated? Well, just, a few thousand. So, when you hear a 4 billion number, it sounds scary. But when you do the math and you factor in how many were compensated over how many years and how many vaccines were given, then you get to a number that shows how safe it is. And it turns out they're actually proving how safe it is, which is kind of funny. And then there was an article recently in the New York Times that went over how rare these reactions are using data from the vaccine court. And what they discovered is that since 2017, half of the reactions that were compensated weren't actually vaccine injuries at all. They were shoulder injuries from improper placement of a syringe. So that means that vaccines are actually probably safer than we thought. We just need to work on proper placement of syringes better. But those injuries obviously are not necessarily, life-threatening. They can be, but the point is that actual vaccine injuries, like you said, extremely rare. We have the data for that. And of course, they'll always deny that and say, well, what about all the ones that are unreported? But then they're the ones that gave that 4 billion number. So stand up and back up that number. If you're going to say that number, you can't have it both ways. If you're going to say that represents vaccine injuries, then tell us what that represents. They always have a but after, at the end, and they always like to change the goal lines and deflect and move things away from what they're talking about once you realize and expose their lies.
And what's interesting as well is not only there's a couple of more reports in the last while, and the further and longer vaccine research goes on and administration goes on, that they're finding that some vaccines are actually having secondary positive effects in preventing other long-term illnesses, that kind of thing. It's not only often for the one disease that or the illness that you're actually vaccinating for, it can actually have long-term beneficial effects. So if anything, vaccines are not even proven to be safe, but actually proven to be very beneficial, or even more so than I think that was assumed before. So again, here we have more of a positive aspect coming on to getting vaccinated.
Yeah, actually, there was a study recently about how the rotavirus was preventing like 1/3 of children. It was lowering their risk for getting diabetes. Which is ironic because that's something that they accuse vaccines of causing. But yeah, lower risk of type 1 diabetes in children who are vaccinated against the rotavirus. New study.
That's incredible, isn't it? Now, let's get into some, before we start going into the puppet masters kind of thing and the real, well, assholes, I guess you could call them, quite purely for the sense because they're very well aware of what they're doing. That's the point. Yeah. I think that's why as well that they irk your ire so much. It's that they're fully aware of what they're doing. And like you say, they prey on on victims. So basically, and we've discussed some of these, like you said as well, the safety aspect of it. What are some of the other tropes and common lines and links that they send you? Because you can be guaranteed that if you get into it with an anti-vaxxer, you will get the exact same links every single time, whether it's you, it's me, an MD, around the world. It's always the exact same sources, and it's always the exact same links, falsified studies, whatever it is. Can you just explain briefly what are some of the things that they throw at you and say, see, look, they're dangerous?
Yeah, we could spend hours doing this.
This is a 10-part series, you know?
Yeah. Seriously. If you want to go into anti-vax misinformation and outright lies, I literally could spend hours doing it. But we'll focus on some ones. And I actually want to focus on some current ones that just came up because there's an anti-vax quote-unquote advocate named Joshua Coleman who his new thing is to do these publicity stunts where he gets a group of anti-vaxxers to carry signs in public areas during big things that are happening specifically around Southern California, like when the Star Wars opened up in Disneyland. They brought out their 10, 12 anti-vaxxers came in. They're wearing masks. They don't even show their faces. And they're holding signs that all have these anti-vax misinformation tropes. And then the most recent one was just last weekend or so at the San Diego Comic-Con. Yeah. So this is what they do now. And for some reason, they think this helps them. They think it creates awareness. But it's funny because if you go on Reddit or if you go on any of the ones that are not outside the anti-vax echo chambers, the absolute, I don't want to say mockery, but pretty much it is.
The derision in it. I am looking at a Reddit thread right now as we speak. Yeah. And the two tropes on it is vaccine makers are exempt from liability. And the other one is US law classifies vaccine as unavoidably safe. And I can't even say what's written in these threads here underneath.
They're I mean, it's pretty funny. I think it's a good learning exercise to show how anti-vaxxers spread misinformation. But here's the thing about these demonstrations. He seems to think that they're effective. They got 60 anti-vaxxers this time, and there's 60 anti-vaxxers and there's tens of thousands of pro-science people around them staring at them like it's a car accident or something. Yeah. It's very strange. And I don't know how this helps them. But what's even more strange is, okay, do your demonstration if you want, or they are publicity stunts. It's basically just for attention at this point, because he's not getting any. And a therapist would have a field day with someone like that. But here's the thing. Then he creates these videos and he calls himself a videographer, but, video producer, and obviously I make videos too. And his videos, forget the actual misinformation. Their worst sin is that they are just boring. They are long. They are way too long. In this day and age, he's creating videos that are 8, 12 minutes long. And you know what action you're seeing in those 8 to 12 minutes? People carrying signs, just different people carrying signs with music, no words, nothing else happening. If you want to do a video like that to show this demonstration, I would edit this thing 30, 40 seconds. Boom. You might even go viral or have a chance to. Yeah. But who's going to watch it? I'm interested in this subject. I watch every anti-vax video, but I started to watch it and I was falling asleep. It's not good videography. It's not good production value. It's not good editing. He needs to tighten this stuff up. And I've actually told him this online. I think he blocked me after I did that. But the point is, I'm trying to give him some hints, it's funny because I see all this stuff and I'm like, if I was an anti-vaxxer, I would actually, I could do a good job. I could do a much better job than them. They're just not doing things right. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, I'm glad they're not doing things right. But yeah, I don't know what an 8-minute video of people holding signs is supposed to accomplish. It is just, it's really bad. But
I think these people are very self-unaware. Have you noticed that? They no shame. Like they don't see themselves at all. They're so convinced of their ego.
And it's not about the children. They say it's about the children, but for a lot of them, it's about themselves. It's about creating Facebook Live videos and viral moments. And, that's why they want public debates on camera so they can edit them into little snippets and post them online and to prove that they won. The funny thing about a vaccine debate is if you win a vaccine debate, it doesn't show that vaccines are unsafe or or not effective. It just shows you won a debate. You can win a debate that and prove the earth is flat. In high school, I was doing debates and I was winning on things that are actually not true. That's the skill of debating has nothing to do with facts necessarily. It's like being a good lawyer. It's like getting OJ off. You won the debate, but does that mean OJ didn't murder 2 people? No. And it happens all the time. So
exactly.
That's a rant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's something that I had written in a tweet before as well. It's like that whole debate thing is if you deliver something with hellfire and passion, you can win. But it's not, like you said, it's not a debate. It's like turning around and saying, okay, 1 + 1 is 2. And then somebody goes, no, I believe or I feel in my guts that it's not 2. I want to debate about it. And it kind of like there is actually no debate. This is what a lot of people are saying online as well. There is simply actually no debate. There can be information, yeah, and it's up to you then to actually read it and learn it. But like you said as well, debates legitimizes them. That's the thing. If there is something to discuss, for example, how you felt about, I don't know, the latest movie or something like that, or if it's a comparison of what might have more merit or not, that's fine. Yeah, if it's an intellectual debate. But on vaccines, you can't debate the science. Yeah, you
can't debate the science. Yeah, no.
Yeah, you can criticize the science. That's absolutely please do. That's exactly what science thrives on. You should,
and we do all the time. Yeah,
exactly. But to debate it implies that there is a gray zone, which there isn't.
Right. There isn't, and at the same time, it creates more publicity for them. And that's exactly what they want. So I don't have any problem debating people. I always tell people, you want to debate me, I'm available anytime.
Yeah,
debate
exactly.
me online. Debate me on Facebook.
They never
Twitter,
do though. Why is that?
They don't because they say, well, I want you to go on camera, and why do you need to go on camera? If you want to just understand and have a debate of substance like adults, why can't you just talk to me right now? Tell me your points, and I'll tell you my points, and we'll go back and forth. But if you need it to be on camera, like in order for it to be a real debate, then that's not a real debate. That's just you trying to create publicity for yourself, for your cause. And that's just you it's basically, they're very self-centered people a lot of times.
Sure.
Everything's about them and what they can produce. They don't really care necessarily about debating the real science. And then that's true because, I've been blocked, hundreds of times, pretty much from every anti-vax, person or website. They like to keep their echo chambers very closed. And I always say, well, I don't block or delete or censor on my sites.
I really want to see what comes up.
Because, I don't have an echo chamber to protect. Now, they're going to be like, well, you blocked me last year. Well, yeah, I blocked 3 people because I block people who give me death threats, and I block people who spam the page with 400 memes, and I've warned them 6 times to stop doing that, or I block them if they're going to gish gallop, which is just throw ridiculous copy-pasted, regurgitated nonsense. I do warn them, and they just continue to do that. Like, that's not helping anyone, and if they come on my page with anti-Semitic, hate or racist stuff, there's a few exceptions, but in general, if you're going to debate vaccines, I don't care any bad anti-vax trope you want to give me. I'm not going to block you for it, but I get blocked for refuting them with facts. And that's just how it is. We don't have an echo chamber. We're most of the world. They have a small, closed, fringe echo chamber, and they have to protect it for sales most of the time.
And just for our listeners in there, just to reiterate and make the point as well that the real truther has to go under the real truther as well, quite simply because he does come under attack, and it's sometimes quite vicious as well. And like you said, death threat kind of thing as well. So it's a pragmatic approach to it.
Yeah.
Because quite simply, there is some freaks out there. There is.
Yeah.
It's just, you just don't know. That's when once it starts getting personal, then I think as well that,
exactly. I mean, the death threats are more for the legislators and the higher up pro-vaccine advocates. But I definitely get threats. And what's funny is people try to guess who I am. And, people have attempted to dox me like so many times. And
they really get nowhere, are they? I've seen this. I've seen this in action.
My point is, even if they do, what's the point? They're going to prove I'm a real person and I'm not a farmer shell and that I'm just a father and small business owner. Yeah. Oh no, you've proven I'm John Smith. How's that going to change it? You don't know me. And that's the thing is like tell me your real name or else I can't debate you. Really? How's knowing my real name going to change facts? What is knowing my name is John Smith going to do anything about our debate? It's not going to change anything. But at the same time, there's actually a thread recently where the people trying to guess who I am. And, I was the husband of a legislator. People guessed I was. What? People get, there was like 10. I put a thread on Twitter about it. They're all so sure that I am like 20 different people. I don't know how that's possible. But anyway, let's get back to the
let's get back into it.
Demonstration.
What I did want to ask you though, just before we continue, would you have an audio debate? If I managed to get someone on, even though they definitely won't, but would you come into like a virtual chat room and have an audio debate like this?
That's a good question. And I'd actually have to think about it. It would probably depend on who it was and what their motivations were, but it's not something I would 100% be against or anything.
Yeah, just as an idea. So maybe we can exchange. Maybe we can get someone like Tony Bark on or something like that, which you'll probably charge.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I don't necessarily like promoting people that
exactly.
Profiting.
That's another thing we need to be aware of in the background.
Because here's the thing with that. I say this so many times on Twitter. I feel like I have to say it like 10 times a day. My policy is very simple. I've never taken a penny, never will take a penny. I produce videos. They cost money to produce. I have to, purchase audio, purchase video, special effects, lots of time to edit them. All this, I spend thousands of dollars a year maybe, doing this if you add up all the time. And I lose money, basically. I don't gain money. And I have nothing to sell, and everything I do is available for free. So to debate someone that's quite the opposite, I'm not sure, their conflict of interest would be a lot different than mine. I don't really have any. I just want the truth out there and just want to defend science and protect children. So yeah, that's a good point. But so we can get into some of these tropes just as examples. So if you look at these signs, and the first one's really simple. It's childhood vaccines, 24 in 1988, 72 in 2019. Oh, my God. That's really scary. Now, for starters, that's an outright lie, okay? We give 13 vaccines on the CDC recommended schedule, and they protect 16 diseases. Mm-hmm. Of course, I would ask them, what disease would you like my child to get that we can remove? And they never answer that too. But so what they're doing with this is they're counting doses. But even if they count doses, they're doing it wrong. But the point is, that makes the sign a lie. It should say vaccine doses, and it should say 54. And the 54 number is through 18 years of life, and in 1/3 of that number includes annual flu shots, including 2 in the first year. And flu shots are probably the vaccine that people get the least, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. So most people aren't getting 54. Most people are probably getting 30 doses. But at the same time, it's nowhere near 72. But even if it was 72, they write vaccines, not vaccine doses. That is a misinformation. That's actually a blatant lie. And they know it. They do that specifically. They're not going to put childhood vaccine doses in 18 years or 54 because that doesn't seem that bad. They feel like 72 feels bad. So that's an easy one. That's the first one. And then we can get into some of the others. Specifically the one where they talk about how vaccines are not placebo safety tested. And that is a big one, which and I could talk about this again for hours, but here's the thing. That's simply not true. All vaccines for new diseases are tested against proper placebo controls and are tested double-blind randomized studies. You can find them online. You can look them up yourself. There's plenty of studies, and vaccines are developed over 10 to 25 years sometimes. They've been working on a universal flu vaccine for over 2 decades. They're still working on it. That's just how long vaccines take. And the cost of that is, of course, pharma. They spend all that money. And they spend all that money developing vaccines and testing vaccines through 3 different vaccine trials. They pay millions of dollars for those trials. And guess what? Most vaccines after those trials, or even after the first trial, are rejected by pharma. They've been vaccines for AIDS. They've been vaccines for Alzheimer's. All go through the process, all cost millions of dollars, and then been rejected by pharma. And I always ask anti-vaxxers, why would pharma reject most vaccines they pay millions for, especially ones for Alzheimer's or AIDS, which would make them,
ultra
billion, just gazillions of dollars. Well, obviously the answer is because they're not safe or effective enough, but they never want to admit that, And then you look at the CDC recommended schedule. There hasn't been a new vaccine added for over 10 years. It's not something that happens very often. It's very rare to add a new vaccine. So getting back to the placebo testing, they've come up with this trope where vaccines have to be tested the way they say they want them to be tested, which is what they call the gold standard. The gold standard is a placebo that is saline solution, which doesn't include any component of the vaccine. this is created by anti-vaxxers, this gold standard. There is no gold standard. The WHO, the World Health Organization, has a great, you can look online if you type in placebo and WHO, and it explains about why vaccines are use certain placebos and why they don't. There's ethical reasons. Once a vaccine's been proven safe and effective, it has been tested with proper placebo controls, and then you're going to have an updated version of that vaccine. It would be unethical to then withhold that vaccine from somebody and test it among an unvaccinated group, because then you're risking that child getting the disease that's already been proven, the vaccine's already been proven to prevent. And when we get into someone like Del Bigtree, who's one of the anti-vax charlatans, probably the leader of the anti-vax movement at this point, or the self-proclaimed leader, he recently came out with this quote-unquote bombshell where he got the original MMR trial and showed that it wasn't a proper placebo control. But when you actually think about it and you realize he was looking at the 1978 updated MMR, which was a minor change to the rubella vaccine strain. Otherwise, everything was exactly the same. The original vaccine trial was in 1971, and that MMR trial was vax versus unvax, proper gold standard placebo that he calls for. And he'll never tell people about that vaccine trial. I post online all the time. Some people don't believe it actually happened, but it was tested. So once they've tested that one, and they know that it's safe, then they're going to update, the rubella strain. They're not going to withhold the entire vaccine from someone. They're going to just show the vaccine that's already been tested, proven safe and effective, versus the new one to see the differences, if it's safer, if it's more effective. And it was. So they changed it to what's now called the MMR2. So this is the misinformation that you get from someone like Del Bigtree and from people online. But vaccines are tested against placebos, and you can find plenty of proper placebo testing online. But that's just this trope they've come up with. And again, there is no gold standard where it has to be a saline placebo, yet there are many saline placebo vaccines, placebo studies. So that's number two. And then another one, of course, is U.S. law classifies vaccines as unavoidably unsafe.
By the way,
that's actually
just to go back onto the saline solution, and it was like the Swedish and Danish researchers here. I'm just have some stats up here as well. The whole, like you said, the saline solution thing is absolute nonsense, because you don't have to inject someone else with something that isn't it. You just simply not have to inject them. And
either that or use just the adjuvant or something that was already in the vaccine. Yeah.
And then they had here it was 600,000 young women that were actually tested, and simply half of them didn't get the vaccine. That's as clean a cut as a control as you can have. And then incidence rates, of course, were quite obvious. I just wanted to state that there, for example, just to give something in numbers here as well. And it's a perfect example. Exactly split down the middle. Half didn't get it, half got it. The results were the HPV vaccines. Works.
Oh, yeah. And it actually, this reminds me of something else. Another point to make is they say, well, why do you use the adjuvants to test when it's already been proven safe earlier and you're doing a new version of the vaccine? Well, not using an adjuvant and just using saline sometimes can actually influence the test, because when you're injected with a vaccine and there is no adjuvant, you don't feel the same reaction. So then when it's supposed to be double blinded, you will kind of know that you didn't get the vaccine if it's just saline. That will affect the results. And that's not something that they acknowledge. But it is important to acknowledge that fact. And
for sure.
Yeah. So again, these are, and if you look at Gardasil, you're talking about Gardasil, they always talk about how the inserts, we get into inserts later, but how they claim there are deaths during vaccine trials. But, if you start, people die during the vaccine trials. Well, here's the thing about vaccine deaths listed on inserts, and I guess this is an anti-vax trope about how, first of all, they say read the inserts. Well, so then what you're saying is pharma doesn't lie, right? Because the inserts are written by pharma.
That, for some reason, is the holy grail. It's the golden tablets for Joseph Smith. It's for them. This is it. They're kind of like pharma shill, pharma everything. Pharma is absolute. It's all a lie. But read the insert.
Right. Read the insert. Let's get. I mean, we might as well get into inserts. So they say read the insert. But my question to them is, okay, I have read the insert, but do you understand the insert? That's actually more important than reading it, because inserts, they list adverse events for legal reasons. Now, these are events that occur at any time after a vaccine is given during clinical trials, regardless of causation. And most have nothing to do with the vaccines. So these are listed on inserts. These are actually listed on inserts: car accidents, drownings, gunshot deaths, suicides. these are car accidents sometimes where the person's not even driving. There's no way you can blame it on a vaccine. So I asked them, do you understand the difference between adverse events listed for legal reasons and proven side effects like allergic reactions, sore arms, fever, rash, etc.? There is a big difference. That's why we have a vaccine information sheet that lists the proven scientific reactions. It doesn't list adverse events because, like, for example, in the Gardasil trials, yes, there were deaths in the vaccinated group from car accidents and suicides, but there are also deaths in the unvaccinated group. The fact of the matter is people die whether they're in a vaccine trial or not. Every day people die. Every day people get in car accidents. If you just happen to be in a vaccine trial and you die, that doesn't mean the vaccine caused it.
But it has to be recorded. You were on the trial, and just like any scientific trial, test, experiment, whatever it is, you have to list all known factors and record all factors. So, and I think it was in the Gardasil, or one of the Gardasil trials, somebody died from a plane crash. It was listed. Yeah, it was simply listed because that's what happened to one of the subjects. So therefore, it gets recorded and it gets listed. So but they go crazy over this. But they hate hearing that. Over it. Yeah,
they hate hearing it. And when I ask someone to tell me the difference between adverse events listed for legal reasons and proven scientific side effects, I never get an answer, and I'm generally blocked or ignored or deflected, or they create some kind of straw man argument in return. But yeah, that's the thing about inserts. You really have to, if you say read them, I say, okay, but I will, but you understand them. And inserts don't prove what they think they want them to prove. And that is one of the most common things we talk about online for sure. They bring that up all the time. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah. So I brought you off rail.
That's fine, because even though that wasn't on the sign, that is something good to talk about. But yeah, I was just getting into U.S. law classifies vaccines as unavoidably unsafe, which technically is true, kind of. A lot of times people say the Supreme Court ruled vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. That's actually a lie. And that was from a dissenting opinion, and they never ruled it. And even anti-vax websites tell people not to say that, but it's spread around all the time. And then the unavoidably unsafe term, it's just a legal term, and it actually doesn't mean what they think it means. It's actually a positive thing. It is a legal definition of something that whose benefits outweigh the risks and who has positive benefits, but no matter how you use it, it's going to have risks. For example, a gun. A gun can defend you and protect you and save lives, but at the same time, it also has risks. A car. So it's the same. It is unavoidably that it can't be 100% safe, is what it means, but its benefits outweigh the risks. So it doesn't show that vaccines are unsafe. It's not some ruling that vaccines are unsafe. People just don't understand what the term is. They just hear it and they use it and they throw it on a sign to try to trick people, and that's what these signs do or try to do. Yeah.
That's them not even copying on unavoidably safe. That's kind of says it there. But
yeah, they really need to look up what that means to understand it. But yeah, so the other thing is they talk about liability, and I believe vaccine makers are exempt from liability. That's their new thing.
This is something that gets spread here in Ireland as well. Yeah, that's the amazing thing, and this is why we're having this conversation, because what happens over there has a complete spillover onto here, and people are using these tropes, these similar links, the same links and the same debunked studies or whatever in these arguments here as well. And this is why we're having this conversation, because there's utter spillover from the US into Europe. And take it away.
Oh, yeah. So here's the thing. So there is something called the vaccine court. And what was happening in the 80s was that these sort of immoral lawyers were just – there was the vaccine for pertussis, the DTP vaccine, and it was out there. And they were creating all these frivolous lawsuits to vaccine companies, and they were just trying to make money off all these side effects that they were claiming were coming from the pertussis vaccine at the time. Of course, most of them weren't. And so the pharma was getting swarmed by all these lawsuits, and they're like, you know what? We don't make much money off these vaccines anyway, and now we got to deal with all these lawsuits. We're just going to stop making these vaccines. It's not going to change, our profits much. And so the U.S. government stepped in and was like, whoa, if you do that, then there's going to be a major public health crisis. We're going to bring back all these diseases that vaccines have prevented. So they stepped in. They created the VICP, which is the vaccine court. It was created to provide like a streamlined system for compensation when there's a rare injury that occurs. And that's exactly what it does. It gives people who may suffer a severe reaction, which again does occur, an opportunity to go to a court and to get compensated And if you compare it to a civil trial, now in a civil trial, you have to pay legal expenses. If you're going to get scientific witnesses, you have to pay for them. In the vaccine court, you don't pay any legal expenses. It's paid for you. It's paid through a tax that the vaccine manufacturers are responsible for. And so that's one thing. It's less costly. Another thing is it's less time consuming. A civil trial could take decades, but a vaccine court, while it does take a while sometimes too, it's not going to take as long. Neither system is perfect, but a vaccine court takes less time. And then the most important thing is it's easier to prove or to win compensation, not prove. I should have said that. It's easier to get compensated from a vaccine court than from a civil trial. And the reason being is that in the vaccine court, you don't have to prove that the injury or reaction came from the vaccine. You just have to prove timing if it's what's called a table injury, which is a list of injuries that are known to and side effects that are known to be caused by vaccines. And so if you can prove the timing, then you can generally get compensated. You don't have to scientifically prove that the injury occurred from the vaccine using expert witnesses. That's known as the Dober standard. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but there's a standard in civil trials where you do have to prove it scientifically. So that way you bring in an expert witness, which again, you have to pay for, and you have to prove that not only was the timing around the same time, but that it actually scientifically there was a mechanism where it proved it. So much harder to win. And of course, if you went in a civil trial, you'd be going against high-paid pharma lawyers. And so it's not only is it much harder to win, it's almost impossible to win. And what's funny is that there's people in Canada, anti-vaxxers in Canada, they don't have our system. I think outside of Quebec, I mean, maybe Quebec has it, but outside of Quebec, they don't have a vaccine court system. And they're creating petitions online to try to get our system because they don't want to have parents forced into, really impossible to win civil trials.
Yeah.
Right. So it's actually beneficial to the families, but anti-vaxxers don't really understand that. Or they do, and they don't want, they don't accept it. So there is this vaccine court. But here's the thing about no liability. You can still sue in civil trial, in civil court after vaccine court, which means they do still have liability. And by the way, this is only the United States. There's other countries where you can sue right away.
Sue. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's nobody's saying they can't be sued. That's the thing. It's such a bizarre thing. It's just a buffer in between before you. If anything, it helps them if they want to bring a case of some sorts to the vaccine court and get compensation for what they feel is something a reaction caused by a vaccine. But it saves you all the hassle of a full-on civil trial. You're more than likely to lose. But in the rest of the world, and like I said before in a Twitter conversation, I think it's pretty much only the US or maybe some smaller other areas outside it that have this kind of a system. But elsewhere in the world, you can sue away.
There are many places where you can sue, and I always ask where are all those lawsuits? And in Europe, I believe just ruled that you can sue now anywhere for vaccine injuries. So, here's the thing. They're completely liable. And it's this, if the vaccines were unsafe or there's some major issues with the vaccines where people could sue, they would be working on fixing those, because then they would, of course, be sued by people outside the country. Not to mention the fact that you still can sue in civil trial here. There's actually civil case going on right now where someone who went through the vaccine court system and then decided to move to civil trial, which is your option, and is now suing Merck for the HPV vaccine injury, and that you can look up that case right now on online if you like, and I always point to that as an example of, well, here's someone that's actually doing it. And if you look at the New York Times article, which I talked about, it's a great article. It's entitled "Vaccine Injury Claims Are Few and Far Between." It really explains the system. And in there, Renee Gentry, who's a lawyer who's been representing people filing claims of vaccine injuries for 18 years and co-directs the vaccine injury litigation clinic at GW Law School, George Washington University Law School, she explains that very thing. She says, and this is the quote from her, if people reject the compensation or their claim is dismissed, they can sue the vaccine manufacturer. Although Ms. Gentry said that because the program requires a lower burden of proof, vaccine court requires lower burden of proof than civil court does, it would be very hard to win a lawsuit based on that same claim. But it is available to them. It is possible. And that's an expert at vaccine injury law and one of the a renowned lawyer who is saying that. So that, when they say they have no liability, they do. And they also have liability for fraud. They have liability for manufacturing defects or, improper production vaccines. There's so many different ways you can sue. To say they have no liability is just an outright lie. Again,
here we are at this disinformation, misinformation, and lies.
Exactly. Exactly. So what they do is they take something real, like, well, you can't immediately sue in the United States specifically. You have to go through vaccine court first. And there's, they don't explain why that was created. And then they say, well, that means that there's no liability. And that means that every country in the world there's no liability. And that means even in the United States, you can never take them to civil trial, even though there's a case going on right now. So again, it's just another way of using real, truthful things to create, lies, misinformation.
And having given us some of the usual things that they fire at you, and you said it before, this we can do a 10-hour podcast on this, and it is an incredible amount. And this theme is so difficult to keep a laser focus on because there's so many branching aspects of it, and it goes quite deep. I remember reading some print media from nearly 200 years ago, and there's always been anti-vaxxers, so it's not particularly a new trope. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't particularly brand new. So that's why it has a long history, and there's just so much to it. So unfortunately,
no, you're right. People being against things that the government mandates or requires or recommends is not new. There's always been people against vaccines. But what is new is that they're using social media, they're using these websites and these movies to sort of weaponize this advocacy and to profit from it and to create, like I said, this industry where now there's movies like Vaxxed, and we can get into Vaxxed if we want. And, that's a movie that made over $1 million for them. And that's a movie where for the second part 2, and they're making a sequel. They actually are getting money from their followers to pay for a sequel that they'll then profit from. These are basically for-profit enterprises. And then you go online to Amazon and you type in vaccine for books, and like 19 of the first 20 books are anti-vax books. And Paul Thomas wrote a very popular anti-vax book, and I don't know exactly how much money they're making off these books, but I know for some of them it's a lot of money. And if you look at how many movies and documentaries are out there, there's not a lot of pro-vaccine documentaries, not a lot of pro-vaccine books. Why? Because there's no profit in that. It seems, the anti-vax movies and books and propaganda, a lot more profit in that. And then you have these people going around the country to these conventions and these speaking engagements and charging for all that and getting paid to do so. And it's just become a big business. And a lot of these, leaders and anti-vax charlatans, again, have their own business that makes money off them getting famous from being anti-vaccine. Then they go home and then they sell their chiropractor business or their supplements or their alternative medicine or naturopathy, homeopathy, etc. It's just it's all connected. It's this quote unquote wellness industry, so even the organic food industry, which has exploded. Everything is connected. They're trying to sell you this idea of wellness, which is, an industry that's not regulated, not tested, but against an industry like the vaccine industry, which is. And they're saying, don't vaccinate, don't do something that's been tested and is regulated, but come buy my supplements that haven't been tested, haven't been regulated, and, we'll cure cancer that way.
Well, listen, that brings us very, very, very nicely into the puppet masters of the captains of their own self-made industries, which will be coming up in part 2. So stay tuned, everybody.
You managed to listen to the Rum Boys talk on Random Urban Memories. Just like and subscribe where you can on all platforms.